The bar was buzzing with the usual noise of laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint strum of an old jukebox that had seen better days. Smoke curled lazily toward the ceiling fans, carrying the smell of cheap cigars and stronger whiskey. At the far end of the counter, a group of leather-clad bikers had taken over half the stools, their booming voices and raucous laughter cutting above the rest. Most of the regulars kept their distance, knowing better than to tangle with men who carried trouble like a badge of honor. Among them sat one man who seemed to enjoy the intimidation most. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard that had more gray than black, and tattoos crawling up both arms. He slammed his glass on the counter, the sound sharp enough to make the waitress walking by flinch. She was small compared to him, her ponytail swinging as she balanced a tray of beers. She didn't look up, didn't respond to his taunt. She just did her job, quietly, efficiently, with the practiced patience of someone who had dealt with men like him before. "Hey, sweetheart," he drawled, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "don't just walk past me like I'm nothing. You gonna smile? Are you too good for us working men?" His buddies snickered, leaning in as though this was just another game. The waitress forced a polite smile, set the drinks on the next table, and turned back toward the bar. "What can I get you?" she asked, her tone calm, professional. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "How about some respect? You think you're better than us, walking around with that attitude? Maybe you need a little reminder of where you stand." The bar's hum dimmed slightly, as though people sensed the shift in energy. A man in the corner lowered his newspaper. A young couple stopped mid-conversation. The jukebox continued to play, oblivious, but the melody seemed thinner now, the tension swallowing sound. The waitress shook her head and began to step away, clearly uninterested in rising to his bait. But the biker wasn't done. With a sudden motion, quicker than anyone expected, his thick hand shot out and caught the edge of her shirt. Gasps rippled across the room. The fabric tore with a sickening rip as he yanked it toward him, laughter erupting from his companions. The sound wasn't joyful, it was sharp, mocking, cruel. The waitress stumbled back, one hand clutching her tray to keep it from crashing to the floor, the other instinctively crossing her chest. But then something happened that none of them had expected. The laughter faltered. One by one, the bikers' grins faded, their eyes widening. Even the drunk at the slot machine in the corner turned his head, blinking as though to be sure he had seen correctly. The waitress wasn't trembling, wasn't shrinking away in humiliation. She stood upright, her face calm but fierce, and beneath the torn fabric, a glint of metal caught the dim light. Dog tags. The silver chain rested against her skin, hanging beside the faint outline of a scar that traced across her collarbone, proof of battles fought far away from this smoky bar. For a moment, the room seemed frozen in time, the weight of silence pressing down heavier than the smoke ever could. The biker's hand dropped, his smirk faltered, his buddies stared at each other, uncertain, like schoolboys caught in the act. And though no one spoke yet, the message was clear in every pair of eyes fixed on her. The man who thought he could break her had just revealed a strength far greater than his own. The silence in the bar stretched on, heavy enough to make every tick of the clock above the bar sound like a hammer against steel. The waitress stood there with her torn shirt, the chain of the dog tags glimmering faintly beneath the dim lights. For a heartbeat, it felt as if even the smoke hanging in the air had frozen, unwilling to drift. Her eyes were steady, unwavering, locked not on the ripped fabric but on the man who had tried to humiliate her. The biker shifted on his stool, his bravado collapsing under the weight of a truth he had not expected. "Wait," he muttered, voice suddenly hoarse. You served." The words stumbled out, clumsy, as though his tongue had forgotten how to shape them. She did not flinch. Slowly, she lifted her chin, her voice calm but firm. "Yes, I wore this uniform before I ever wore this apron. I've stood on battlefields you wouldn't last 5 minutes on. So if you think tearing my shirt makes you stronger, you're more lost than I thought." A low murmur rippled through the bar. The old man at the counter whispered, "She's a vet." The young couple in the corner nodded with wide eyes, their hands still locked together. Even the bartender, who had seen his share of barroom brawls, stood frozen with a towel clutched in his hand, afraid to breathe. The biker's friends looked to him for guidance, but he was no longer the alpha. His broad shoulders, once puffed with pride, sagged slightly. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the scar that crossed her collarbone. It was no shallow scratch from clumsy mischief. It was the kind of scar that carried stories of pain, courage, and sacrifice. The waitress took a step forward, her tray finally set down on the counter. Her voice grew steadier, stronger, filling every corner of the room. "I fought for this country so that cowards like you could sit here and drink in peace. So that men like you could laugh and mock and forget how much blood it costs to keep that freedom alive. And I'll tell you this, every scar I carry is a reminder of the price I paid." "What do you carry?" "Just cheap leather and empty bravado." Her words cut deeper than any blade. The biker's throat bobbed as he tried to form a reply, but nothing came. His companions dropped their gazes, unable to meet hers. The laughter that had once filled their corner of the bar had curdled into silence, their smirks replaced by shame. Then, almost as if by instinct, the patrons began to shift. A man at the nearest table gave a nod of respect. The bartender straightened his back and placed a hand over his chest. Someone at the far end whispered, "Thank you," soft but clear enough to be heard. The energy in the room had changed. No longer was the waitress the target of mockery, she was the center of reverence, the living reminder of resilience and honor. The biker finally lowered his eyes, his hand retreating from the counter as if burned. "I didn't know," he muttered, his voice a shadow of its former bravado. I didn't know." The waitress's gaze did not soften. "That's the problem," she replied quietly. "You don't know. Men like you rarely do." For the first time all night, the biker looked smaller than the woman he had tried to belittle. Around him, the bar remained still, every patron holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. And though she stood there in a torn shirt, she looked stronger, taller, unshakable. The power in the room had shifted completely, and everyone knew it. At the corner of the bar, unnoticed until now, a man in a tailored suit sat with his young daughter. He wasn't the type you usually found in a place like this. His polished shoes looked out of place on the dusty floor, and the watch on his wrist probably cost more than the jukebox in the corner. He was a CEO, known in business circles for his sharp mind and relentless drive, but here, stripped of boardrooms and bright lights, he was simply a father trying to navigate the quiet struggles of raising a little girl alone. His daughter, no more than 7 or 8, had been sipping a glass of soda through a straw, her legs swinging above the floor as she watched everything unfold with wide, innocent eyes. She had seen the biker sneer, had seen the waitress stand tall, and now, as the tension in the room shifted into reverence, she tugged gently at her father's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, eyes never leaving the waitress, "is she a hero?" The father glanced at the woman, standing proudly despite the torn shirt, her dog tags shining like a badge of honor. He felt something stir inside him, respect, admiration, and something else he hadn't felt in years. He leaned down toward his daughter. "Yes, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice low but certain. "She is." The girl's small face lit up, and then she asked the question that made him pause. "Can she stay with us forever?" Her words were innocent, but they carried a weight that sank deep into his chest. For weeks he had been debating whether to hire someone to pose as a girlfriend, someone who could fill a role at upcoming company events so he didn't look like a lonely single dad. It had felt like the practical solution, the safe choice, but sitting here now, watching the woman who had just silenced an entire bar with nothing but truth and courage, he realized how foolish that plan had been. What his daughter longed for wasn't a staged smile or a stand-in companion. She wanted someone real, someone who could show her what strength and kindness truly looked like. The waitress, still composed, turned slightly, and her gaze caught the little girl's. She softened, just for a moment, her sternness giving way to warmth. She gave a small smile, and the girl beamed back as though she had just been noticed by a superhero. The father felt something inside him shift, a quiet knowing that fate had brought him here tonight for more than a drink. Around them, the atmosphere continued to hum with awe. Patrons whispered words of thanks. The bartender finally broke the silence with a steady clap, and soon, others joined in, the sound swelling until the entire bar was filled with applause. It wasn't just for the waitress, it was for what she represented. Courage, sacrifice, dignity. The biker who had torn her shirt sat slumped over, shame etched into every line of his face. He didn't try to defend himself. He didn't try to laugh it off. He simply lowered his head, as though the applause itself was a judgment too heavy for him to bear. The waitress stood tall, letting the clapping wash over her, not as a victim but as a victor. She gave a small nod of thanks, her hand brushing the dog tags gently, as though remembering the comrades who couldn't stand there beside her. The father rose from his seat, his daughter clutching his hand. For the first time in a long while, his heart felt full, hopeful. He looked at the waitress and saw not just a woman working late shifts to make ends meet, but someone who carried the kind of strength no money, no title, no business deal could ever buy. As the applause died down and the jukebox stumbled into the next song, a hush lingered in the air, a reverent silence. The father bent down to his daughter and whispered, "Maybe she's not just meant to serve tables, sweetheart. Maybe she's meant to change lives." The girl squeezed his hand tighter, her eyes never leaving the waitress. "Ours too, Daddy," he smiled, the kind of smile that carried the weight of a decision already made. "Yes," he said softly. "Ours too." And in that small bar, where smoke still hung heavy and glasses still clinked, something greater than chance had unfolded. A shirt torn in cruelty had revealed scars of sacrifice. A cruel laugh had been silenced by truth. And a single father and his daughter had found, in the strength of a stranger, the possibility of forever.